So I figure we've teased quite a bit about doing a show about religion, and it seems a fairly fitting topic. Not today, though.
Let's keep that tease going.
Yeah. What do we say to the God of Death? Not today.
Not today.
The reference is lost on you, I'm afraid.
Not today, Jesus.
It was blurring the religious conversation with the Game of Thrones reference.
Oh, yeah. I don't know Game of Thrones. I know. So, I did see a meme, and I did get the meme. It has the woman from Star Wars, Princess Leia, Carrie Fisher, and she's like, "I kissed my brother." And then it has a woman from Game of Thrones, and she's like, "Please."
Yeah. For those of us who are aware of the series will certainly understand the reference.
What is the phrase again?
The phrase was, "What do we say to the God of Death?" And the answer is, "Not today." Yeah. So not today on the religion conversation.
I just know that not today, Satan.
Yeah. Similar enough reference. That works.
Yeah.
I think that's a play on the same meme.
Yes.
But
yes.
yeah, so one of the things that came across the radar that I was intrigued by and thought might make for an interesting conversation was a headline that caught my eye very specifically because of how it was phrased. And it says, McConnell backs the Electoral Count Act to prevent a repeat of the January 6th insurrection, comma, all but ensuring passage. And there are a couple of things there. So one, not taking away from the clickbaitiness of the article or the skewing of the article, however you want to phrase that, not taking away from the presentation. The actual substance there, quite worthwhile, and we can spend some time talking about that as well. But the headline made me think about this whole concept of media bias and the changing of the headline depending on the leaning of the reporting source. And we've talked about misinformation in the past, and we've talked about changing the mental model in a way to progress beyond something that is a mental block. And this kind of merges a lot of those concepts in a way that we haven't necessarily called out, but I thought it might also be worth exploring a little bit, which is what's the big difference between reframing the narrative or having a specific way of presenting the information versus completely changing the narrative in a way that would make it more like you're spinning a tale. And so those are two overall topics, one being the substance of the act itself, and the other being the reason the headline caught my eye. And we can go into either one, both, whichever makes the most sense, but I figured I would put both of those on the table as options, and we'd go from where the conversation goes from there.
Okay. I just thought I'd, not to derail this completely, but you know how there's how biased is your news media source. Just thought I'd look it up for USA Today, and they sit in the most reliable for news box, and they skew slightly to the left. Just thought I'd.
It's worth bringing it in for sure. I'm trying to remember. There was an app that I had pulled. I'll have to look it up. So that maybe that'll be follow up in a moment. But there was an app that I pulled for news specifically that attempted to present current news or in general what you would see from like Washington Post and New York Times and everybody in Fox News, and have 2 or 3 stories, one leaning more toward the left, one leaning more toward the right, and one being more center in the way it presented the information, so that you could kind of get a feel for what the actual story was, as opposed to the op-ed kind of reporting that might be included. I'll look that one up because I think it's worth mentioning as another way to sift through information.
Yeah, I just thought it would be. I feel like we talked about it once, and I just thought I'd bring it up. It was no surprise to me that USA Today sits where it does. It's not a left-leaning paper. It's not a left paper, but it is, or it's not a media outlet or a media source that's would be considered left, but it skews from the center off to the left and sits in the reliable area. Anyway, yeah, it's interesting that I think it's a good idea that they're working on this bill, but there was a quote from McConnell, Senator McConnell, that says clearly when a 150-year-old law has successfully brought us certainty, finality, and one orderly presidential inauguration after another, we need to be delicate and careful with any changes. And I was just like, yeah, 150 years where this was this law that they're working on passing was not needed.
150 years of successfully guiding the transfer of power, only to take less than a year to prove ineffective.
Yeah. That's a few dozen presidents,
Yeah, it's 44 to be, I guess, technically 45, right? I mean, the transition of power did happen. It just didn't happen without interruption.
I don't even know. Well, I wouldn't even call it an interruption so much as there was. I don't want to. Okay, so let's not diminish what actually happened. It was a coup that we could say it was.
It was a failed coup.
It was failed coup. Like, it wasn't. It was. I don't even know that it was a failed coup because they didn't have like a. Well, I guess they're. Did they really think they were going to overthrow? So here's where I guess my confusion comes from. So it was a coup, for sure, but it was unorganized. So was it a failed coup if it didn't accomplish its goals? But what were the goal? Well, did they have the goal of overturning the election? That's what they say their goal was, but did they really think that they were going to do that? Because when everyone said go home, they went home. Or when Donald Trump tweeted go home, they all went home.
And they didn't immediately go home, though.
They were waiting. They were finishing their beer and whiskey.
Well, they went home when it was apparent that there was overwhelming authority in place to stop it. Is that how you would? That's not even how you would phrase it.
Are you? Is that a nice way of saying they got scared of the military?
Pretty much.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, because not much force was used. I mean,
right.
One woman was shot and killed. She was kind of in the wrong place at the wrong time, doing the wrong thing. A lot of the Capitol Hill officers, the Capitol police officers were injured, and that was a big deal, I think. But I have difficulties. I have difficulty understanding was it failed or not, because they didn't have a lot. It was an unorganized coup. I'm happy with that.
Yeah, I could rephrase as well to say it was a failed attempted coup, because it was an attempted coup in some fashion. Like it may not have been organized, but it was an attempt to in some way affect the outcome of the transition of power. Yeah,
it puts us in the category of, prior to January 6th, 2021, we were a country that had no attempted coups to overthrow the government, because that's what a coup. That's what you do with a coup. And now we are no longer one of those countries.
And now we have concerns about whether or not a group could easily overthrow the government, leveraging the potential interpretation of mechanisms in place because we haven't clarified them.
Yeah. Well, we are a country that is growing up. Yeah,
There's a certain point where we should acknowledge that we're no longer growing up. We're in a level of reclassifying and re-identifying things that we know are wrong, and we're just kind of failing to do so.
Yeah. So it made me think. It made me think of. Made me think of a thing that I have now forgotten. That's twice this evening. I'm having a hard time with the memories. We're staying on track. So let's keep going. If I remember it and I can find a way to put it in, I will.
That's fine. I actually did look up the news app that I was thinking about as well. It's probably worthwhile to go ahead and plug it here. The app is called Ground News, and the way they present things, you can pick whatever story and you swipe left and right to see different sources reporting about the same information, and it gives you a leaning and if you subscribe, you can get interpretation of factuality as well.
Okay.
So there's a paid feature that does like some level of fact checking. But having just the political leaning and how far it kind of seems to lean in that direction is helpful to sift through, especially when you can just swipe from one side to another and go from left to center to right and kind of see the differences in the way the information is being presented. And so you get a much better feel for, okay, this is the fact, and these are the different things that the organizations are either trying to add to the narrative or trying to provide as interpretation.
It'd probably also be a good thing if, or a nice feature if you could see what corporate overlords owned a particular news outlet or a media source.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's one of those things where there are a lot of correlations that could be of interest if they're associated with a political action group, for example. That to me would be of interest. Mm-hmm. Or not necessarily the news source, but the owning company or the predominant stakeholders.
Right. It's like, why does NBC never report anything bad about General Electric? I don't know if they do or do not, but that's an example. I know that General Electric owns NBC, and so it's like, how likely is it for the NBC Nightly News to report on something, let's say it's something that, GE doesn't want them to report on?
I didn't realize GE owned NBC.
Yeah. I think there's a whole thing about, have you watched 30 Rock?
I have.
Yeah, I mean, they talk about GE being their corporate overlords all the time.
Yeah, I never really paid a lot of attention to the actual, factual company owning a portion of the news media.
Yeah. I can't remember where. I remember being in college and that being talked about, and it's it creates having a corporate ownership that creates a conflict of interest whenever. But I remember the thing that I was gonna say, and that was that I've heard this before, and it's one of it's kind of like, it's one of those things, like, I'm sure many people have thought it, and I came up with this thought all on my own. But it's such a it's such an easy thing to get to that when I heard someone else, better educated and more intelligent and with the accolades say it, it felt validating. But it's just there's this idea of like, well, let's what would our founding fathers have done in this situation, or what would they think about this? And it's like, who cares? They created a whole government that was designed to change itself carefully. So who cares what they would think? Do we have a problem here? Well, let's fix the problem. I think they would be, well, perhaps they would be a bit put off at the idea of us trying to remember or trying to get an idea of what they think or what they meant, where they meant for us to, continually reinvent our government that fits the world we live in. That's what I think.
It's interesting to take that and think about the guiding factors, I guess would be a way I would phrase it, for the different branches of government. Because I would completely agree with the sentiment from the executive and legislative branches. But you kind of have to take into account the idea behind the writing when you take into account the Supreme Court, don't you? Or do you really try to just take it at face value and say that it has to change by Congress to go any further, which kind of renders the Supreme Court useless in a lot of ways?
Well, I think part of what they wrote, what their intention was, is like, we're going to give you these freedoms because we know that you should just, these are the freedoms that you should have, but we also want to, we're trying to make it so that you could, we want to be able to scale. We want to scale with the time, and so it is important that we don't lose the freedoms that we were already given, and that we don't infringe upon those freedoms. We might need to alter them, or even better understand what a well-regulated militia is.
It was one of those things where we can see that the idea behind the framework for the government was that Congress had a lot of power to be able to reshape things with time. And it makes sense from a general overview if you're thinking about it, trying to take like an architectural approach to saying, okay, someone has to have the power to make changes because we know this isn't going to fit or work for forever. It's going to have to be adapted. So where should that power predominantly lie? And so it makes sense you start with Congress or the legislative branch. The executive branch you could kind of make similar arguments for. The gist of the executive branch is to ensure to the extent possible that the laws of the land are enforced, and to act as a way of getting things done. When there are roadblocks, trying to bring people to the table, being a negotiator and a mediator, and making the whatever decisions have to be made to continue the enforcement of the laws of the land at a high level. But the point that I was making is that the Supreme Court is kind of rooted in having to understand to the best extent possible the gist and meaning behind what was written, because law or the Constitution itself, and therefore what laws would be constitutional or non-constitutional, that just doesn't change very often. Like the laws could change frequently, but we haven't had that frequent a change to the Constitution for clarification purposes. So which way would that one go? Would that be that the judicial branch would have to have some idea about the meaning behind it, or is it a failure of the legislative branch to modify the Constitution regularly to fit the needs?
I definitely think the latter is a problem, a big problem. So here's different song, same tune. It all goes back to the ineffectual nature of our government the ineffectual nature of our government is such that they are not able to make changes. It's like not any good ones, and when at the end of the day, when we like try to identify what the issue is, it's always going to lead back to corruption. It's like, why did Donald Trump's presidency seem so effective for certain issues? Why would well, because the people that he stood on the I feel like this is too much of a compliment, but the phrase that comes to mind is, that he stood on the shoulders of geniuses. But really, this is what culminated in the changes that came about during Trump's administration. And I'm primarily thinking about how the Supreme Court was stacked in a particular direction. That's a culmination of like 3 decades of work. Like this is something where it's like this work began with the, or maybe even 4 decades of work, because, really the idea of overturning Roe versus Wade is something that has been on political players of a regressive nature. It's been something that they've been working on since 1980 with the first Reagan campaign for election.
Yeah, I pause, not because I disagree. I pause because taking it to corruption doesn't quite feel like it captures the issue as much as what we've mentioned before, which is that it's an ineffectual branch of government as a result of partisan politics.
But isn't that the corruption? Part of the corruption?
And that's why I kind of paused, because it depends on how you want to
define the corruption.
Right. Like if it's corruption of the idea of the functioning of the government appropriately and not, performing the duties of the role as it was designed, then yes, that would be a type of corruption. Money would obviously be a type of corruption, seeking power and maintaining power. There's so many different ways to take it that it's difficult to nail down what that means, whereas it's very clear that there is absolutely an issue of partisan politics. Like, we can point to that very easily in general discourse, in the workings of the different branches of government, in just day-to-day conversations with people who decide to interject any type of political commentary. You can see those divides, and that's problematic at a level that's so fundamental to how we view people that I'd say it's more a bastardization of identity than it is a corruption of the legislative branch itself. Does that make sense?
Ooh, it does. I follow that, but I was going to go along the lines of like bipartisan politics is a significant form of corruption, because the whole point of being in Congress is to represent the people that elected you there. And
yeah, good point.
So the fact that you're working at maintaining power or playing partisan politics, that is corruption. It's like there are some studies that were done, and if you need me to get be able to cite the sources for the show notes, I'll be happy to get that information. But basically, the thing that whether there's a significant popularity for a bill or low, regardless of the popularity of a bill with constituents, the likelihood of that bill being passed is about 30%. Whether it's even if the population was 100% popular with the population, it still has a 30% chance of passing. The thing that gets bills passed is money, and corporations tend to have money or large ones do, that they can use to pass bills. So, yeah, that's ultimately that's where I'm looking. That's what I'm seeing as the corruption.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm on board with that. I was obviously thinking about it from a different perspective at first. But as soon as you started talking about the representation or the portrayal of something versus the popular opinion among constituents, I mean, that's a very clear divide. We can point to the Dobbs decision as a huge reversal of popular opinion, or reversal of decision based not on popular opinion, actually goes against popular opinion.
Right. It's there are people that have made their way to represent their constituents, and they have an agenda. So, but it's interesting that now that this is passed, it's like, well, what are they going to campaign on? There's a lot of single issue voters that are now no longer need to be single issue voters.
Realistically, you should never be a single issue voter.
Oh, I agree.
And that's a whole different rant, though.
But yeah. Anyway, let's not go down that rabbit trail.
It is worth pointing out, though, that out of this, the going back to the Election Reform Act, I wonder how it's going to influence things, because I'm trying not to just lambast a particular group of people. So I'm trying to think of a phrasing that doesn't sound overly derogatory. There is a group of people who I don't think would recognize that this actually is a direct response to the lies and misinformation that have been sown about the election. I don't think it would be on the radar. I think it actually wouldn't even factor into that particular group of people's decision to vote. All that to say is I wonder if it would have any kind of impact on the midterms, or if it's strictly this just makes it more difficult for someone to try to subvert the process in the same way that was attempted on January 6th. Like, I don't know if that maybe was an odd way to follow it. Rephrasing it slightly, I see, if you are in support of the Election Reform Act, that being a major thing for a midterm election, just showing the sanctity of democracy, preserving democracy, etc. I don't think that's going to actually play, though. So it feels like while it's a significant thing among those people paying attention, it's insignificant and probably irrelevant to the people that should be paying attention, is maybe a better way to phrase it.
I see. I think I follow that.
So I guess all that to say, do you have any thoughts on what might be the primary driver of rhetoric around the midterms so far?
Oh, I mean, the most interesting thing. So the things that I feel like I can answer the reverse of that question, and I think we've talked about this, but it's interesting to see what's happening because, as we've said before, it looks like Biden's being allowed to be Biden, and what happened in Nebraska in the summer was. So what happened in Nebraska in the summer was an interesting thing. It was an interesting and hopefully telltale sign of what to expect in the next 42 days from now as we record. And that is that people were upset about the ramifications of the overturning of Roe versus Wade and all of these states with trigger laws and future laws that are draconian surrounding the issue of women's health. And, there are, as I said a few minutes ago, it makes me wonder, it's like, let's talk about women, or let's think about women who come from a position come from the pro-life position, and now what do you do you still, are candidates still gonna make pro-life a thing, or have some of those flipped in that particular place? How many people are looking at Nebraska? It's like, oh well, maybe people weren't as pro-life as they thought that they were, or maybe it's been exposed that the pro-life position isn't actually pro-life, and I think it's more that than anything else. Based on results we saw in Nebraska. So there's that, and I'm like, I know I had some other points, but I forgot your original question.
My question was just if there was anything that, typically there'll be one or two things that seem to really drive midterm campaigns and ads and things of that nature.
Yeah. So I think the people, some pollsters have made comments about a red wave turning into a row wave. I find that interesting. I hope that maintains. I remember I know some folks that have thought or have made comments about how Biden is buying votes by canceling the debt, student loan debts, and so I mean, I'm for those people voting for progressive candidates, but I don't see that as buying votes. And that's a cynical outlook. I think that if this was his, and if he had a second term, I think he'd do the same thing there. I think it's the right thing to do.
That type of argument strikes me as the same type of argument made by people who don't understand a lot of different things. We were talking about this before we started recording. I made the cynical observation that there are a lot of people that I don't think realize they pay for roads. And it's the same kind of thing. Like it's no different than decreasing taxes. That would be no different than saying that you're buying a vote by having some monetary impact to a person, right? It's a stupid way to phrase it, because anything you do can affect a person's financial state in any way. It can be positive or negative depending on what the changes are. It could be increasing taxes, and that would be negative impact, etc. Are you going to say that they're forfeiting the vote because they're increasing taxes, or
Right.
or refunding the vote? I mean,
it just fits their. It's a talking point that fits their narrative,
right?
And it has no merit. We've had 40 years ago, the idea of trickle down in economics was forced upon the land, and we know that it doesn't work. And maybe it's time that we start working on trickle up economics. So.
I paused for a second because I follow, right? Like that's been one of the talking points is rebuild from the middle class, and I just don't know that I've ever heard trickle up economics.
What is that word? It is a play on words, because things don't trickle up, but they certainly they haven't trickled down. So.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why I didn't want to immediately jump on it. It's just a semantic argument.
Yeah, it's meant to be wrong on purpose.
Yeah, I just had to call it out because I thought it was funny. But it is very much what has been said from day one, right? Even during the campaign, he was talking about wanting to strengthen and rebuild the economy from the working class back up instead of relying on the way things have been thought about previously, and so it makes sense.
I don't want to pass these thoughts off as my own. It was something a friend said, but it's he pointed out that it's sort of ridiculous that campaign Joe Biden as a candidate for president campaigning has to overpromise on so many things, and Joe Biden as elected president will never be able to fulfill the promises that his campaigning version made. And it's not that he's bad; it's just not feasible. But you have to campaign in a certain way because we have pushed, or American politics has been pushed into a hyperbolic state when candidates are campaigning. And if you were to just look at the work that has been done and look at judge them on their own merits and not compare them to campaign promises, I think that he would be in a like a B+ range. he would be doing well, you know? But when you compare it to campaign promises, it's like, man, you're doing bad. You're failing here. Like, we don't have nearly as much as, your campaign promised.
Yeah, I know we've talked about it before. It's one of those things that's interesting though, because and part of it is I think being accustomed to or recognizing without any pessimism that the campaign is an idealized version of a platform, and so it's more this is what's guiding attempted actions more so than what would actually be legitimate promises for action, if that makes sense. All that to just say that, like, in my mind, I think it's remarkable that we have movement in so many different ways that mirror at least the ideas presented during the campaign, where that doesn't typically happen.
Right.
We've had a much more, I hate to say robust because that doesn't seem right either. There's been a lot more action and movement in the directions of those things that were mentioned during the campaign than I remember from pretty much any recent president.
I'm not it's like in some respect it's like he's allowing, or at least since his approval rating went down at the beginning of this year, and it's just like, you know what, why be cautious, why try to get reelected if we're not going to do anything? Why straddle the fence here? And it's just like, let's work and let our merits get us reelected. Let the work that's I feel like that's a conversation that was had.
For me, it feels more like it's a matter of we expected movement because we're impatient, and we're just seeing that it just takes perseverance, and over time, with perseverance, you get there. And that's just not the type of approach we've had recently. It's been either it happens or it doesn't. I'm not willing to keep going back to the table and trying to figure out how we can make it move a step forward. And I think that's just a different approach in general.
So I'm curious. I'm interested to see what's going to happen in the next 2 years when we roll around to 2 years from now. It'll be an interesting discussion to talk about the that election, the president. That'll be the next presidential election. That'll be interesting. But I'm also really looking forward to seeing what the DOJ and FBI do after the midterms. I'm hoping that it's something.
Yeah, if not, then it's going to feel like a massive failure on the part of any and everyone involved. I mean,
it'll feel like we've lost quite a bit.
Yeah. How can we not at least pursue something? Regardless of who we're talking about at this point, like, there are so many different cases and so many different instances. If nothing comes of any of them, then it's all a sham.
This is the time to give the OJ case a run for its money in a big way. This is the time for the OJ case to be blown out of the water. Like, it is time to the word judge is not the one I'm looking for, and the word, it's what? It's interesting. I feel like if you talk to someone who's in the military and you use the word accountable, I feel like people who have served in the military would have the opinion that civilians throw the term accountable willy-nilly in day-to-day life. And accountability is a very important thing in the military. And It is time that we hold elected officials accountable for their actions, regardless of how highly ranked they were in government. It's sort of like all men are created equal. That's what's in our Constitution, and that means that all men need to be tried for their crimes the same way.
So maybe another way to phrase it, just thinking back to previous show where we talked about being in a country where you have basically the amount of justice you can afford. You also have the amount of prosecution you can afford. Maybe it's time we actually see the resources and the weight of what we can bring to bear in the name of actual accountability be shown instead of what the defendant can bring about in terms of monetary resources to continue to wiggle around actual statement of truth.
In the strongest and the most important sense of the word, it is time to hold people accountable for their actions. We have a number of different ways set up for you to get in touch with us to provide feedback, ask questions, or just comment in about something we've discussed.
You can hit us up on Twitter or Instagram at untitled_hosts, or shoot an email over to untitled.hosts@gmail.com.
Or get in touch directly with Jesse at jthart.com, or get in touch with me, John, via telepathy.
If you would like to support our work or are interested in listening to our new after show feed, head over to patreon.com/theUntitledPodcast and take a look at the options we have set up.
Thank you for listening.
We hope you've enjoyed the show.
And we hope to connect with more of you as we continue this journey.
That's a wrap.